Hello, GEMA members, and welcome to our next installment of GEMA Talks. I am joined here today by Blair Rich, who is a Georgetown graduate from the college, who has had just a storied career in the entertainment and media world, particularly in the world of marketing. And so we're going to have a very substantive and interesting conversation today about her career and her career growth in the world of marketing, but also her, her influence and the great marketing initiatives she brought to the industry, and over her long career at Warner Brothers. I think you all find it really fascinating. And she's now doing some really interesting work with Virgin Galactic, and we'll talk about that as well. So without further ado, Blair, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, I'm really well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. I usually like to really start from the beginning. And so if you wouldn't mind, I knew you were born in Las Vegas, but you moved to LA when you were relatively young. And so maybe talk about, we'll really get into it with Georgetown, talk about your interest in Georgetown, when you started having an interest, why you had an interest, and how it all sort of unveiled from there.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I guess the classic thing of never declare exactly who you are and what you'll be when you're a kid because you don't know yourself yet. And
yeah,
very defiantly told my parents when I was in high school that I will never live in Los Angeles and I will never be in the entertainment business. And they sort of looked at me and of course, that's exactly what I ended up doing and where I ended up living.
Exactly.
So much for how much you think you know as a teenager. But yeah, I was deeply interested in politics. I had worked as an intern. I was really fortunate and managed to get an internship on the Hill as a high school student, which is pretty unusual, working for a Democrat at the time by the name of Tim Wirth from Colorado. And I'm aging myself here slightly, but it was 1992. And it was, Clinton was running for office for his first term. And at the same time, Tim Wirth and a handful of senior senators on the Hill were deciding not to run for re-election. There was a sort of notion that you could do more outside the system than in it. And Tim Wirth was one of those people. And he was extraordinarily close to Al Gore. He was the closest sort of Senate compatriot, as you would, if you would rather, to Al Gore. And they had worked tirelessly on environmental issues together, written a ton of really important environmental legislation together. So Tim Wirth put his office behind the Clinton-Gore ticket when Gore joined the ticket that summer. And the DNC that year was in New York City. And so they offered that volunteers could go and work at the DNC. And I was, the first to raise my hand. I couldn't wait.
That's exciting.
It was. And I was 16 years old. It was everything. And so I made my way to New York and, spent my first day in the basement of the Sheraton Hotel making signs. Like I had, for delegates, I had like splinters all over my hands. And I was walking out of the basement of the hotel, and life is a lot about luck and timing. And I ran into closest family friend. You mentioned I was born in Las Vegas. My closest family friends from Las Vegas, who were Georgetown graduates. And he had gone to Georgetown Law with Bill Clinton, and he was raised a really significant political force on behalf of the Clintons in Nevada. So I ended up spending the rest of the convention with them instead of in the basement. And I really got quite an unbelievable front row seat to literally to the convention, and met Bill and Hillary that week. And I mean, if I wasn't enamored with politics and the power of it, and before that, that was it. I was going to work on the Hill. I was going to go to Georgetown. I was determined, and that was the catalyst for me. I mean, that's a fun story. Truly, I was deeply interested in public service, and I was really interested in government, and I really, as a young person, didn't see anything more interesting in the world than that. And there was only one place I wanted to do that, and that was Georgetown.
Wow. So kudos to you. You got accepted and went to Georgetown. And so when you were there, I guess the first question is, what was your experience like at Georgetown? And secondly, did you continue to pursue the public service government route, or did you switch at some point? And so talk a little bit about both of those areas.
Georgetown was a remarkable experience for me, and one that I value enormously. And I talk about that a lot. You know, coming from Los Angeles, which is such a one industry town, and it's so run by like a singular mindset. I mean, I guess you could say the same about DC and politics.
Right.
But really, the Georgetown experience for me was incredible because it really opened my eyes to the world. And I think Georgetown is just second to none as a catalyst for that. And I met so many people from all over the world. And that was a real eye opener for me. And I really craved sort of, you know, being a global citizen and traveling more and kind of being connected to the world in a way that being brought up in LA didn't quite afford.
Right.
And, you know, LA wasn't quite as worldly then as it is now. I think LA's grown into itself considerably as a city. Thank goodness.
And it was still a bit unique to be a Georgetown student from Los Angeles. Now California's the #1 feeder state to Georgetown. Back then, it was still kind of unique.
It wasn't that common, actually.
Yeah, it wasn't as common.
And so, you know, in terms of the government thing, I realized pretty quickly that I really enjoyed government from an academic perspective, but it wasn't going to be what I did with my life. I just, you know, Clinton
what was the insight
then. A couple of things. I think Clinton was in office by then, and it was as young and as liberal. It seems sort of safe maybe now looking back from a current day prism, but it was as young and as liberal as the White House I think had ever been. And still I felt like it was just a very conservative world around me that I wasn't used to. I don't mean politically conservative, I mean culturally conservative. And I also started to think a lot about the realities, and probably watching Clinton in his first term had a big impact on this thinking for me, because I was a big Clinton fan, I still am, but I just think that the reality that started to dawn on me, that you have to sacrifice so many of your essential kind of priorities and values to get work done, and just watching the system at work, and now it's worse than ever, I think. That started to kind of not feel like the right fit for me personally. And the recognition that, or the realization rather, that you can achieve a lot and have influence on the political system and on issues from outside the system if you apply kind of your resources in the right way. And I think that sort of was juxtaposed to a moment for me where I really wanted to live abroad. And so I spent the summer in London, and I ended up working for Warner Brothers in European marketing. And it was sort of an aha moment. I don't think I'd ever really thought about marketing. I didn't really know anything about marketing. And this combination of sort of being a Georgetown student, living abroad, doing the entertainment thing, but through a lens that was different than anything I had sort of had evidence of before, that was sort of equal parts creativity and business sort of strategy. And so, yeah, that's when I realized I wasn't going to pursue government as a career.
So, so you got you got that internship. And so when you graduated Georgetown, was it pretty clear at that point that you were going to probably get a full-time job there, and that's kind of what happened? Or
I worked for Warner Brothers every summer in London, and my grand life plan was to move to London as soon as I graduated and do that. But the world was changing pretty rapidly at this point. It was 1997, and I had a phenomenal mentor in London by the name of Julian Senior. He had come to Warner Brothers ages before that with Stanley Kubrick. There's this great story where there's a red phone on the desk, and the phone rang every day, and it could never go unanswered, and it was always Stanley. And there was a protocol for how you answer the phone, and I answered the phone once, and sort of a great little moment for me, a great memory. But my mentor, he was very prescient about sort of how the industry was changing. And, you know, when I had gone into this system just 4 years earlier and started to learn it, everything was pretty decentralized still. Yeah. And it hadn't been yet this sort of really—
wasn't as sophisticated really either.
It wasn't as sophisticated. There hadn't also been the opening of a lot of what are the critical global markets now. And it was just before the moment where the movie industry woke up to the fact that it could make so much more money overseas than domestically in the US market. And that completely changed the business. This is before China, before you were releasing movies in China, before you were releasing movies in Russia, and all of these just enormous markets, were sort of coming online, so to speak. And it really changed the business, and the business became much, much more centralized, and Warner Brothers became much more centralized in its sort of marketing and distribution operations. So it seemed like the opportunity, in his words, were to make sure that I went back to LA and that they knew I had a brain and who I was, and I could actually do things, and then I could decide to go and do whatever I wanted. And so I went back to Los Angeles thinking, oh, I've had all this experience, right? I'm 22 years old. I've had so much experience. Exactly. I've had all these internships, and I'm going to get this job. And the interview turned out to be an informational interview. It wasn't even an actual interview. That's and I panicked because I had already called my mom, like, I'm moving back to LA. I brought suitcases. I was looking for a place to live. I'm a person who sort of like determines things very quickly. And then I do what I think I'm very decisive. Maybe a little bit too much so sometimes. So I was fortunate enough, and eventually the informational interview turned into an actual interview. And I was offered a position of marketing trainee in the international marketing group at Warner Brothers Pictures. And I remember I used to sit in my cubicle. My cubicle was next to the messengers. So the messengers knew like all my dating life, all about my personal life. Like they were my best friends. And I used to sit and make my own stationery where I would just put marketing, and I would take the computer and cut off the trainee part because I thought no one would return my phone calls if they knew it was trainee call,
Trainee equals not good. So let's take that out.
Turned out to be great because it was a really wide open door to sort of look around and see everything that wasn't being done and then do that thing regardless of how glamorous it seemed at the time. And people really recognized that tenacity, and it was a huge door opener for me.
What it's interesting because you were interested in government and public service, and now you're working in entertainment world and marketing. What about marketing, and maybe specific to theatrical marketing, what do you think you took to there, and why did you end up thinking that it's something you would like and be
fulfilled? It's all politics, Rich. You know that. I used to joke with my team and the executives all the time, and they'd say, oh, you have a government degree from Georgetown. What a shame you don't use that. And I'd be like, oh, no. I use it every day.
Yeah, if you only knew.
There wasn't a marketing degree at Georgetown, and if there had been, I probably wouldn't have majored in it. Mm-hmm. Marketing for me at the time was about sort of curiosity and on-the-job learning. I didn't become a politician either, but I still know what I learned from reading the Federalist Papers and from being in diplomacy classes and learning about, bilateral negotiations and problem solving. And I think it's really about having curiosity and how you apply curiosity, and how much you're willing to admit that you don't know by way of being able to learn. I never was afraid to say I didn't know something as long as I applied myself correctly. And I was curious. I mean, I will say I spent a decade at Warner Brothers waiting to be, found out as a fraud because I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm dealing with all these filmmakers and artists and in this very creative endeavor. And I had been told candidly my whole life that I wasn't creative. Like I was raised in a way that I was the academic one in my family. And I was
that's interesting.
Kid, and I was like always a really good student. And so I grew up being told I wasn't creative. And then I ended up in this super creative field thinking, oh my God, I'm a fraud. And every day I was going to be found out,
That's interesting.
I finally, after a decade, got over that. But that was a thing.
Yeah. Talk about which people may not realize enough. Talk about the fact that, being in the marketing area is really like a right brain, left brain job too, right? It's not all just creative, right? There is sort of two sides to the brain that both sides have to be nourished, right?
Yeah, I think that's my favorite part of it, really, is that you have to allow yourself complete creativity. In my case, in the field that I was in, I was working extraordinarily closely with artists. I was trying to realize artist vision and translate an artist's vision. I'm working with editors and producers and graphic designers. I have to come up with art and basically trailers, short films, advertising campaigns. It's a super creative endeavor. At the same time, I'm running a P&L and figuring out what a data strategy should look like. I'm figuring out all kinds of analysis as to what's working, what's not. I'm dealing with research, and any other number of things. And I think it's my favorite part about marketing is it is that left brain and right brain. And unless you're using both in almost equal measure, you're not actually doing it. And yeah. I do think I find that just incredibly engaging,
But you also found, you're being humble, but you also found that you were pretty good at both parts of it, right? Sounds like you were able to, express yourself creatively in the proper way, but then you also happen to be good with and facile and comfortable with the numbers side of it, because you're dealing with, explain to the people there. I mean, a marketing budget of a tentpole movie is what, $200 million, $150 million, right? Just one movie, right? So you're working with massive numbers here too, right?
Massive numbers on a global scale, putting out about 22 films a year was what we were doing at Warner Brothers around the world. It's very high stakes.
Yeah.
A lot of investment. Marketing is a very expensive endeavor. The investment in the films themselves is a very expensive endeavor. So the stakes are pretty high. And the interesting thing about marketing films versus marketing other products is, you can market another product, put it on the shelf, sort of test out or tease out sort of the consumer response to it, adjust, tweak, keep going. It has a shelf life, so to speak, for a while. A movie has one weekend to live or die.
That's right.
And so you're basically doing a product launch, if you will, 22 times a year.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
For a totally different customer base, for a totally different idea, for a completely different product, all of which are unique. And if you don't treat them all as completely bespoke and unique, then you're not really doing right by the film.
And every one of them has a different set of investors, if you will, right? The people that you're working with on this movie are completely different than the creatives on this one, completely different than the creatives on that one.
Creatives, financial partners. I mean, it's a very layered matrix of people.
Yeah. With a lot more complexity than people probably realize. One other thing I think I would imagine has been really interesting as you evolved into the job and got more senior over those years, and as technology began to play big roles, I assume it became much more both interesting and complex about the new innovative ways to market, right? So suddenly there's Facebook, right? And people were like, well, why would we use Facebook for marketing movies? And I'm sure that became a huge piece. So talk a little bit about the innovation that happened over the last 10 or 15 years and how that played into your job.
I was at Warner Brothers. I mean, I started in 1997. I was there for almost 25 years. So, I mean, the whole world completely changed in that regard. Amazing. I mean, I remember trying to figure out the best way to market a movie on MySpace. Like you're talking about Facebook. There's MySpace. Who am I going to reach on MySpace? And how am I going to make that dynamic? Yep. I think the dawn of the digital age and this incredible technology and this interconnectivity, it created an unbelievable wealth of opportunity. It also created an unbelievable wealth of challenges, right? Because the film business had always relied on word of mouth. Well, word of mouth is something you could always curate over time. Now, suddenly, by Thursday night, you might not even have your weekend because with social media, word of mouth spreads so quickly.
Right.
If somebody doesn't like something in a campaign, it can spread and become viral so quickly, right? So it represented a tremendous opportunity and also a tremendous set of challenges. And I think also just inherent in it was that it became this thing of like, I always remember people say, well, we'll just put on digital, or we'll do more on digital. And I think the thing about digital is you have to have a deep respect for authenticity and how people use it and how people want to be communicated with and to, through these platforms. There's a tendency to just kind of shove so much stuff into digital because it's not as expensive as television. It's a faster turnaround. It's sort of, it has less friction in that regard.
Yeah.
And that's where you can go really wrong, I think.
I think people too, it sounds good to your bosses, right? That, oh, I'm doing this new thing in something called Snap. It's a whole new thing. And, you're probably still figuring it all out, but it sounds good, right? When you're looking at some new innovative thing.
I had a really good experience as all these different products and companies came online, and I had really terrific, like fruitful partnership insofar as we would go. I built a very digital first kind of minded team, and I was surrounded by really exceptional minds in that regard, and I was lucky. There's that sort of thing as a leader, right? Like my whole leadership philosophy was like surround yourself by the smartest possible people and then listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that I highly recommend people do that. But we would go to Google, we would go to Twitter, we would go to all these companies, Facebook, even before Instagram, and then to Instagram, and say, like, what products are you thinking about experimenting with? What media products, advertising products are you thinking about experimenting with? Let us be your guinea pigs at a low, at a really fair rate, and we'll deliver like the best content we can against these products and see what happens. And if they're products that work for you and that you continue with, like, we'd like to keep like, fairer prices. And it was great, like in offering ourselves as test cases, as being sort of strategic risk takers, understanding that we would hold on to execution and really be sort of dynamic in how we would execute on things. We got to do a lot of really dynamic executions, and we got to sort of be first in a lot of ways, which is really important perceptually.
It may surprise people too, to know that not all the studios were that way. So many of them were averse to change and averse to new innovative platforms. And so what you're saying was actually quite innovative, because that's not the case everywhere.
There's this weird thing that is endemic to Hollywood, which has always been so counterintuitive, which is that here you have this business that is sort of shaping global culture and shaping through culture and art and storytelling, like so much of how people think and experience and share storytelling. And and there's so many advances in it in terms of technology and visual effects and sound design and all of these amazing ways that people film content. And yet it is so conservative. It is always the last online in terms of adopting new behaviors, and that, I always found that maddening.
Yeah, no, there is definitely, it's very Lemmings philosophy, and very risk averse and afraid to make mistakes, if you will.
Yeah, and I think it was fun to push against that, to push against those norms, because as tech was, booming and blossoming, and still is, and tech has this great, component to it, which is that all of the successes in tech are based on this like test and learn culture where failure is considered valuable. And that has never existed in entertainment. There is no test and learn culture in entertainment. Right. No matter how much people say that they want there to be one, there simply isn't.
Yeah, that's true.
And so how to calculate strategic risk taking and being bold and kind of breaking molds a little bit in that, it can be daunting and it can be complicated, but I still really believed wholeheartedly that it was necessary.
One specific part of your job as a senior marketing leader in the film industry, which I'd love to talk about it and maybe have you talk more about, is the working with the talent. And as obviously early on in the film, maybe you're not as involved, maybe you are, but you're clearly, it's more of the, the creative execs talking about the concept and all that. But once it gets to the point where you're going to have to market this piece of work, talk about that interplay with the talent. I'm sure every talent's different. Some want to be involved in a granular basis, some maybe not as much. And just that responsibility you have because this is something that they've been working on for so long. So A, talk about that responsibility, and B, talk about what that interplay was like and how you did it. How do you do it successfully?
Sure. Well, working with talent and filmmakers was honestly one of my absolute favorite parts of the job. Okay. I really loved working with artists. In my position, my boss before me, and then me when I took over the global marketing group, marketing was always on what they call the green light committee. which is the group that decides which movies to make and not to make. I was on that committee, when I was in my position at Warner Brothers.
Got it.
And marketing, I think anywhere, has an increasingly very strong voice in that part of the process, because nobody wants to invest that much money in a movie if you don't think that you can sell it or connect it to an audience. And questions have become, in the age of streaming, increasingly complex, right?
Sure.
And so I was always involved at a really early stage. Also the marketing process, because of digital and social and people paying attention to every part of the process, also started much earlier than it used to. In terms of navigating talent, I mean, it was interesting at Warner Brothers, all of our projects used to be homegrown. And then we even got to a point where we would go and pursue projects where there were, because of places like Netflix and Apple, and there was like people were openly vying for projects, and so being the press, and there was a lot of projects that we really went after and that we got, that we really, really wanted, that weren't necessarily homegrown. And as the head of the marketing group, I would go in as part of a team with, the executives and production and distribution, and I would be pitching these sort of best and brightest filmmakers, why us, why Warner Brothers?
Oh, that's interesting.
What's our perspective? How do we see it in a way that other people don't? So that even became part of the process, which had never been something before. But in the more general sense, it's really critical that marketing understand and come up with their own kind of fluency with the filmmakers. If you don't have that, the marketing will never be right. And if you don't really understand what's at like the core of a filmmaker's vision and what they're trying to create, you're not going to do the job. And also, candidly, it's about trust, because if they see it in a way and you really think it has to be marketed differently, they have to trust you in that judgment. They are giving you this, their baby, so to speak, this thing that they spend years of their life in.
Right.
And for every filmmaker, there was always conversation before they even went to shoot the film, so that I would have a perspective and understand what they were doing. And I think that there's, artists need advocates. Like, artists have their own vulnerabilities, and what they do is really brave and really daunting, and it's kind of a fragile thing that requires a lot of people working in harmony to be successful. And I always believed that while I had, my ultimate responsibility was to the company and to the financial objectives of the company, I always felt that the path towards doing that well was also to have a trust and a kind of advocate relationship with the artist, which, by the way, when done correctly, also meant like telling them when they were wrong and being able for them to trust in you enough and believe in you enough to go with it the way you're saying, because they have a lot of power in this too.
Sure.
And so those relationships are critically important, and just the people management and the relationship management and the EQ of it all, if you would, is hugely important to being successful in what I was doing.
Great. Thank you. That's really, really helpful for our audience to understand that, because it's such an important piece of it all. And not everyone has the deftness for it. I want to talk about leadership specifically too. Obviously, you were a longtime leader at Warner Brothers. Talk a little bit about what you believe are the key leadership traits that you utilized and what you think are important to utilize in the industry.
Sure. I really believe in being an empathetic leader. A lot of people talk about that now, so it's almost like, I don't know if that's almost like, an obvious thing to say, but
explain that a little bit more to people, what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think that, look, it's really hard when you're running an organization, a global organization of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, to kind of see your staff as whole people, at least how I translate it. I don't know what like the textbook definition is, but for me, it's like you're dealing with a whole person, right? And you want to get the most out of your group and your staff, and so you have to deal with the whole person. And there's always going to be dynamics, and there's always going to be friction, and it's hard to navigate all of that. there's a lot of pressures on teams right now in terms of competition and success or failure or COVID or things that are outside pressures that like nobody is actually prepared to lead through is the truth. But, you know, I really believed in team building. I really believe in inclusion and letting people kind of show up as their whole selves and trying to create a culture within a group where people feel they can show up as their whole selves, and also, you know, and also where there's efficiency, communication, like there's all these emotional parts of leadership, right? And then there's the tactical parts. And for me, all the emotional parts had to be really well balanced with things like efficiency. I inherited a group that was not used to working in what I thought was an efficient manner. Mm-hmm. And those things cause frictions, and they cause the other things to break down. It causes tension, it causes frustration, it causes infighting. So I'm a big believer in like hyper organization, hyper efficiency, being decisive. And, you know, I think sometimes that gets complicated. Like sometimes when you're really decisive, it feels like you're not giving someone's idea enough airtime. And does that really feel like you're being an empathetic leader? So it's not like someone has all the perfect answers. You set out with your ideals. And I think something for me that candidly has always been a constant work in progress is, you know, I'm like this A++ personality. And so I have an answer before you've even finished the question. And I'm like already on to the next thing. And I think really important part of leadership is getting constant feedback so that you're listening and then giving that feedback loop back so that people around you really understand that you're listening and you're relaying that feedback and you're being really honest. And I think part of leadership is about vulnerability also. I think this is this thing in business and in corporate environments where people are afraid to show vulnerability. And I think that's such a mistake because I think when you show that you're vulnerable, like I used to do these quarterly surveys for the entire group, hundreds of people, right? And they were very honest questions. It wasn't rigged or anything, and they were completely confidential and anonymous. And you would get back, like, it was very clear, like, this is what's going well. This is what is not going well at all. This is what's really bothering me, but this is what I like. And then I would do a quarterly town hall and I would relay all that feedback to everybody.
That's great.
And I would be very honest, like, a lot of you feel this way. That's not good enough. I have to do better there, or we have to do better there. I called HR and we're coming up with some way to address that. You know, I think people really deserve to feel listened to and heard. And that's where corporate environments kind of can be a little bit crushing. So if you can be a leader who finds a way to carve out the time to overcome that reality, it's important. I always had an email inbox that people could send anonymous questions and comments to, and I would answer it sort of like monthly or weekly, depending on how full it was. Like, I think you have to be really available to people.
Yeah, that's great.
While also displaying like strength in leadership and, you know, courage of your own conviction and be pretty clear on your vision, because otherwise you get pulled in a million different directions and then it sort of falls apart. Yep.
A delicate balance. Yeah. I'd love to spend a little time talking. I mean, you've worked on some of the most iconic films of the last several decades. And I'd love if you wouldn't mind talking about, and I know they're like children, every one of them is special, but maybe 3 or 4 of them that you could cite that are particularly proud of, or you felt like the campaigns really made a tremendous difference, or what?
Sure. I mean, I actually did count when I left I left Warner Brothers finally just this past December. And I think the calculation was I had worked on over 460 films.
Wow.
Not including my internship.
That's incredible.
That's a lot of movies. A lot.
Amazing.
Yeah. But look, I mean, I was part of some unbelievably extraordinary experiences, whether it was the entire Harry Potter series. I mean, that was my life, you know, for a decade. Like, I mean,
talk about pressure.
I used to think of Hogwarts like actually like the great all behind. I mean, you know, I used to have dreams. I used to dream in Hogwarts. It was really, I was like, oh my God, this is too much. But that was quite an odyssey. I mean, that's a once in a lifetime sort of thing. Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, it doesn't really get more exceptional or sort of culture making than that. And Inception with Chris was a remarkable experience because the movie was so fiercely original, and it was so intensely smart, and yet he never let how intelligent it was ever make it seem like it wasn't for everyone, that everyone wouldn't want to be part of the experience. And I mean, I still have on my desk from the film, I don't know if you can see that, but
yeah,
the spinning top, which I will never not have the spinning top on my desk. Hangover was like when Warner's wasn't known to be that great at comedy. We had Hangover, and that was a total game changer.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I met Bradley Cooper. So that leads you to Star is Born, which I actually came to Georgetown with him a few years ago to talk about. And
to a packed house, I might add.
Yeah, because of Bradley, not because of me. To be clear. And there's been so many others along the way. I just have personal things that I just feel personally attached to, Where the Wild Things Are, that Spike Jonze made, that was an incredible experience for me. Crazy Rich Asians, which is one of my most proud sort of moments of my whole career, and sort of
and that was a movie people said if it did 20 million at the box office, 20 million it'd be a home run. Yeah, what did that do worldwide? Hundreds of millions, right?
Yeah, I think 260, 200, I don't remember, 75 million, but more importantly, yes, you always need success, and that's what we're measured by, but more importantly, it was such a hallmark of representation and celebration of people seeing themselves on a screen who had never had that experience before, and how we were able to expand that out to be a moment of celebration for all cultures, like a win, in representation for one group felt like a win in representation for more. And I think that had a real impact. It was the same time, and I don't want to say it was the only thing. I mean, Black Panther, Ryan Coogler's remarkable film came out. It was in this moment, right? And it was just deeply, deeply meaningful. And I think it really opened doors that had been, I don't even think they were shut. I don't think the doors even existed before. And so that was hugely important.
And the point I made about the box office on that is what it proved, which I think had always been this sort of conventional wisdom in Hollywood, was if it's a movie focused on a certain ethnic group, like it's not going to have a wide popularity. And I think you guys did a brilliant marketing campaign, but you also proved that that's just not true, and that's just it's a very myopic way of thinking. And I think that's what was one of the remarkable things about that film.
It's not true. And
I'm sure that was part of your pitch, was I know this could be a wide commercial film.
Our pitch was we always saw it as an event movie, period. And people are like, yeah, okay, whatever, that sounds nice.
Right.
We made it an event movie.
Right. That's right. I want to talk about Virgin Galactic in a minute, but before we get off of the film marketing world, just curious about your views on there's obviously so much discourse around the theatrical film world and movie theaters, and movies aren't going to be in theaters anymore, and why need theaters, and they're going to crumble. And I know people have been saying this since the 1930s, but I'm curious about your viewpoint as a marketer about the importance of theaters and what you think will happen. What's your guess of what will happen over the next 5 to 10 years with the theatrical world?
I mean, look, I think that if you're really analyzing streaming and what makes a streamer, it's TV, it's short form. I mean, there has never been a film that has birthed a streamer, right? If you look at Netflix, it's, I don't know, probably House of Cards, right? Among others. There's always like the one series, right?
Yeah.
That really, if you look at Hulu, is it Handmaid's Tale or whatever it is, right? Like you can always kind of pinpoint it to the one that like made people watch, that then start to habitualize like you going to that place as a destination. So I think that the reality is that people will look for more array of content on streaming. That's already happening. That's a given. And unfortunately, there are certain types of films that used to sort of survive in a theatrical environment that were sort of smaller or more specialized, that aren't faring as well to those audiences now, that don't seem as what people call theater worthy. They're not as the big spectacles or other things. I mean, I think that there will always be a place for film and cinema. I just do. I think the exhibition business needs a unbelievably large overhaul right now, and unfortunately there just hasn't been a great job done there of kind of adapting to the times. And I sort of think about it, it's like if I said to you, Rich, let's go to the Apple store and then go get lunch, you'd be like, oh cool, yeah, I want to see the new phone or whatever. I could go play around with like the new whatever. But to a lot of people, I said, oh, let's go to the movie theater. Like, it's dirty, the food sucks, the seats aren't clean.
I gotta park,
And so I think that just that experience, the content has become so exceptional. And I think the experience needs to sort of meet the moment of the content better. And I think, look, I think everyone's concerned a little bit right now, and rightly so, that the system is sort of creating in the movie business, sort of this system of haves and have-nots. There's like these juggernaut movies, right, that are the giant IP, and you know what they are. They're Marvel and they're DC and they're superhero, and they're like Fast 9, which just came out last weekend, which did great, which is wonderful for the business. But then where is there room for everything else? Where is there room for like the different tastes and the different appetites and the different kind of audiences who seek, because the audience is not monolithic. And I think the minute we start treating them as such, then you have a problem.
You made me think too, when you said how smaller movies now, don't get potentially theatrical exhibition. And, if Crazy Rich Asians was coming out today, I think there's some folks that would have said that's perfect for a streamer. Don't even bother putting it in a theater. Right.
I think that would have been a real watch out.
Yeah. So I think that's a good example of how it's really changed. So talk about what you're doing, really interesting, what you're doing with Virgin Galactic, and talk a little about, explain, a lot of people know what it is, but some may not. So explain what they're about, and explain what you're charged with helping them do there.
Sure. So Virgin Galactic is a consumer space line. Our ambition is to take regular people, customers to space. It's space tourism. It is fascinating. I'm learning so much.
I can imagine.
I'd say from the audience's point of view, I think what's been really interesting to me, just in terms of how this happened, I was approached by the CEO because he's looking at this through the consumer lens, and we will be taking customers to space and have this sort of private astronaut experience. It's a 90-minute flight, and we go up through the Earth's atmosphere and into, you have, time in zero gravity, and then you get back to your seat and you fly back, and it's this, shockingly comfortable sort of 90-minute experience. We take you up, you look back down on the Earth, you have this transcendent, life-changing experience. And the idea is that when you come back down, what do you do with said experience? How has this sort of like perspective, this life-changing perspective on Earth, kind of changed what you want to do when you return?
Mm-hmm.
And how are we going to articulate a sense of community around the people who have these experiences to really make that moment last and have impact in how you want to kind of live through that experience when you're back?
That's interesting.
And
out of that.
And that is something that I thought was really great. When I got the call, candidly, I said to the CEO, I was like, so I'm from the movie business. All I know about space is I worked on Gravity and Interstellar, like both huge successes, but not real. And I was sort of confused, to be honest, as to why they were calling me. The interesting part, and this is the other thing I love so much about marketing, is that what I really am is I'm a brand storyteller. I know how to come up with a narrative for a brand, and I really understand, I think, how to connect that sort of narrative with the customer, with the consumer. Right. And what I'm really doing now is I'm helping them come up with their brand strategy and kind of launch the consumer part of their business. in all that that means. I'm advising the CEO, and it's really fascinating because it is all storytelling to an extent. It's all about the same thing I did with movies. It's how do I make you have an emotional connection to what this is? How do I create a passion-driven brand out of this? How do I sort of put myself out in culture in a way that's going to make you lean in, take notice? What's going to create that sort of cultural curation that gives you affinity towards this, right? And how does that matter? And I spend a lot of time trying to figure out like the value of a brand fan and a company's value being comprised as much about its intangible assets as its tangible assets. And there's this sort of this new world business reality now, right? You see all these IPOs and like, how are some of these companies, it was the Netflix story forever. Like, are you kidding? Like, and now look, right? And why something like a DoorDash when it goes public or any other thing, why it has this value. And it's very important in this day and age that you have this sort of relationship with the consumer. I say euphemistically, like we want to be a wearable brand, right? Like a brand you want to wear, not because we make clothes or anything. In other words, like it should be a thing, like a badge, like that you have this connection to, that has this sort of, you know, cultural cachet and that's meaningful to people, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make space available to all. Like right now, you know, when we reopen sales later this year, the ticket is a high price ticket, obviously, and that is, you know, that's what it is. But the idea is that over time, and with the reason Richard Branson has pursued this as a live stream, is that over time you can bring that down and create opportunity for the next generation, where more and more people can have this experience, and we sort of make space available to all. And
well, it was like airplanes. It was super expensive in the 40s and 50s, and only a certain customer base could go, right?
Exactly like that. And this notion of like people, you know, this has always been an experience that has been controlled by governments, which meant it was extraordinarily restrictive, right? In all of human history, 562 people have gone to space. I mean, you think about that. I mean, infinitesimal, right?
Nothing.
Like, yet there's no human on Earth anywhere who doesn't wonder about it. Who doesn't stare at it. You come out of the womb, you're encoded in your DNA. You look up, you have this connection. And so why isn't this for everybody? Why can't you feel that you can explore it? Why can't you feel that you have this, you know, next level connection to it? And that's what we're all about. And that's what the story I'm trying to help them tell.
No, that's great. It's really exciting. I would think one way it's a little different than the movie business is here it's a new product. It's a new concept. So how much of your marketing, and is this a challenge for you? How much of it is, I got to actually explain to people what this is, and I'm trying to develop an emotional connection. There's sort of, it seems like there's two pieces there.
There's definitely two pieces. There's definitely a lot of explanation. There's definitely a lot of more people need to know that this is here and it exists. I honestly don't find that challenging. Like half the movies I found, they weren't stories people knew. Nobody knew what they were about. You had to explain everything in bite-sized pieces usually, you know. I don't find that challenging.
Good. I'd love to conclude. Why don't we conclude with some advice that maybe you can dispense for our younger alums who are either in school or young alums, or even people who are thinking about advancing in their careers. Just love your thoughts about what kind of advice you'd like to share for young people and how to break in, especially in entertainment media, which we know is so competitive.
It is. It's competitive and it's tough. Look, I would say that I think there's a tendency, you know, culturally in the world right now to advance faster and faster and to be like completely happy with every aspect of everything that you're doing. And the reality is that if you want to get your foot in the door and if you want to advance, you've got to tough it out. You have to be willing to do anything, work harder than anyone else. I mean, at least that's what I did. That's how I did it. You know, I think that not every part of a job is going to be as exciting or glamorous as other aspects of it. And it takes it's a lot of sacrifice and it's a lot of hard work. I think also I'm a huge believer in internships. I'm a huge believer in trying things, especially while you're in school, because it's really hard to understand what something functionally is unless you do it. Like, candidly, this Virgin Galactic thing, I had no clue what I was saying yes to. It was so compelling, and I really have a high regard for the CEO, and I thought it sounded so amazing, but I didn't really understand what I be doing here, what really was the role that I could develop for myself, or what the opportunity was, that the company really needed and could benefit from. You have to get into things and learn them.
Yeah.
And academic study and the pursuit of academics is exceptional, and it's great, and it opens your eyes to a lot of things, but it's never going to be a replacement for lived experience. You got to get out there and try things.
And by the way, I also say to young people too, is that one of the reasons you have to try it is because you may be disillusioned once you do it. You think you want to be a TV writer or whatever it is, and then you do an internship in a TV writer's room, and you say, actually, this isn't for me. And so that's just as valuable.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else?
In terms of advice?
Yeah. Any one last piece?
Yeah, I'd say get good at networking, like really polish your communication skills, the value of a thank you note, the value of sort of kind of doing your research and figuring out who people are and figuring out different ways of connection and making those meaningful. I think sometimes networking, in my own life networking, I even went like this, like you get embarrassed and you don't want to be like, oh, that person. It's really an important skill. It really is. Yeah. And I think because so much exists right now through social media, through LinkedIn, through these very sort of impersonal things, trying to figure out how to kind of bridge connections in a more personal way is really important.
And also that piece about polishing your communication skill and learning about the business. I assume when you're interviewing people, right, that those people are going to stand out, right? And so it'll help you just get smarter about what you're doing, but also when you're meeting with people, they're going to take notice to someone who's done their homework.
Yeah, you really have to sharpen your interpersonal skills and how you present yourself. What's your why? Why is it interesting or worthwhile? What are you interested in? What have you learned about what the person who you're talking to has done, and why did that inspire you? You want to create points of connection.
Yeah. What's your why? That's great. I like that. Important. Blair, this has been awesome. Fantastic. Love it. Thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule to do it. Really appreciate it. I know all our GEMA members will get a tremendous amount from this. So thank you.
My pleasure. I love Georgetown. It was such a transformational place and moment in my life, and so many good things happened from it. And I'm still friends with a ton of the people that I went to school with there. So that's nice too.
That's great.
Hold on to those Georgetown relationships. They're gold.
Yes. And best of luck with Virgin Galactic. We'll be watching closely.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
Okay. Thanks again. Bye, Blair.
Bye.